both a graphic designer and a Minecraft player, I always find myself using the principles that I learned in college in my builds and my other stuff I do in the world. Seeing as Minecraft is essentially an art form in its own right, I figured it would be a good idea to teach you guys what I know about design from the perspective of an actual designer. To start off this series, this episode is going to be about color and texture, but more specifically how to use color to add texture and character to your builds without overcomplicating things. Let's get started. So, the first thing I want to share is what hue, saturation, and value are. Now, they may seem obvious to some of you, but I think it's a good principle to work from. So, what is value? Value is just a color's relative darkness to its relative brightness, right? What is the scale in between the darkest and brightest point of the color that a color can be? Hue is the actual color itself. So we have like pink, purple, blue, all of the colors, the actual thing you call the color, that's the hue. And then saturation is the strength or dominance of that hue, right? So if we take a look over here, right, this may have some green in it, but this has a whole lot more green in it, right? The dominance of the color relative to what the block in this case looks like, that's how saturated something is. This has some pink in it, but I would argue that that's a lot more pink than that. And it's not to say that one of them is pink while one of them is not pink. It's to say that this block right here has a stronger presence of pink than that block does. And we know that pink is just white plus red. So we know that there must be more red in this block than there is in that block, simply because this one's more saturated. But okay, so you have an understanding, roughly, of some general color practices to help explain how and why color works, right? We have value, hue, and saturation. We know what those three things mean now. But how about the way they're actually working together? Now, I've gone ahead and organized each of these pillars, with some general blocks, stuff that you can generally find for the most part. Let's take a look at orange and red, for instance. The orange blocks, right, you can see that it goes from a darker orange all the way to a lighter orange. And whether or not it was perfectly aligned, up for debate. But assume that this is the darkest orange, right? And that's the brightest orange, which is more or less yellow. And this is more or less red. So because this is a darker orange than that one, this would have to have, based off what we know about value, more black in it than white. But opposite to this would have more white prevalence, instead of black prevalence in the color orange as a whole, because again, darker, lighter. Simple stuff, really, but I think it gives a good understanding about how value actually affects the color. Now, we can also argue that value is very similar to saturation, as I use over here, for instance, right? This is a little less pink than that would be, but it also has to do with value. So at surface level is where we're going to stop here with color theory and stuff like that. And we're going to see how color actually works together so we can build something back there and make it actually look good. So right here, you'll notice that I have monochromatic color schemes. And all that means is that on the color wheel, which you see on your screen here, the word monochromatic just means colors that use the same base hue. And it's a variety or a variation of their dark lights tones, their saturations, their desaturated colors. We have yellow as the base hue here. And then variations of the color yellow all together will pretty much always work. There might be a few exceptions, right? Like you might not want to use that block because it's too orange in comparison to, like, let's say the clump of blocks here. But they do all go together because they're generally in the monochromatic region of their color wheel. We have this wall and it's got, some tough bricks, it's got some stone, and it's got some stone bricks. Now, stone bricks and stone obviously are the same exact block in terms of what their base is. Their base is stone. We know stone is gray, so there's not much saturation or hue there to really worry about, but there is value because we can have dark stones, we can have light stones, they can be more white, more black, and we know that in order to not have just, let's say, a flat wall of gray stone, we have to add some texture in order to add some depth and some design to it. I think we're all pretty much on the same page there. And if we're not, well, now you know. You could argue that tough doesn't go with this color scheme, and though it might not, I think that due to its texture, its pattern, and its general overall base underlying hue of gray, it does work to some extent. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and keep it there because I actually like the way this looks together. These colors, generally speaking, will be acceptable together. The same goes here for deep slate. We just have some actual deep slate, some polished deep slate, and some deep slate bricks. The same concepts apply, right? The mortar itself has a darker tone to it, so it helps separate and give definition to the block so you can see the difference between them. But the actual textures give the block not only some contrast and some depth, but it also allows it to work well together. So these two, again, would be monochromatic in their design and their color scheme because they're using the same base color throughout. This is like, let's say, black. This is like gray, technically nearly the same color and really just a difference of value. But for the sake of example here and what you actually might be using to build things with in this game, I wanted to stick with these 2 block palettes because I find myself using them pretty much every time I make a world or play the game at all. You could also come over here where we have analogous color schemes, and all that means is that these colors on the color wheel are connected to each other essentially. If you look at the color wheel, you'll notice that, red is next to orange, which is next to a lighter orange, which is next to yellow, and they all work together because of that. The same here with purple to like, let's say magenta or pink, right? We have red, and then we have a slightly orange, this is just the base terracotta block, for instance, but it works for the purpose of example. And the same here, blue to light blue to cyan to green, and then green to yellow again, but a slightly darker yellow, and then to orange, right? And these colors work together because they're analogous to each other on the color wheel. I am trying to speed through this so we can get to the actual building part. And then lastly, we have contrast and complementary color schemes. Now, this sounds possibly scary, possibly daunting. I promise you it's not. Contrast is basically the stark difference between one thing versus another thing. For instance, a circle, very different from a square. Contrast is there to help us see the difference between 2 things that are closely related or juxtapositioned closely together, but are very, very different. So contrast allows us to see that. And we can see that, right? We know that black and white contrast each other because black is the lack of brightness or white in there, and then white is the lack of black or darkness in there. And that's why they work together. They're contrasting colors. The same goes for here, orange and blue on the actual color wheel. They contrast because they're complementary to each other. So now we're into the complementary word. And basically all that means is that if you look at the color wheel, whatever color is here, let's say orange, the opposite of the color wheel is blue. So they will work together because they complement each other. Now, I'm simplifying the hell out of everything I can here to make this as quick as possible because you're not really here for color theory as much as you are here for how does this apply to Minecraft. We also see that we have Christmas colors like red and green. Those go together even if you don't like them. They do, generally speaking, go together based off the color wheel. And then same here, right? We got some like Lakers colors or something like that, right? Purple and yellow. You might not love the combination. I personally don't, but I can't argue when I do know that they do work together. And that's my really quick crash course on color in Minecraft. I'm going to stop yapping about color design, and I'm going to show you on the build I have over here an example of how these all work together. Oh, that was a little bit closer than I thought. So I went ahead and found a house online that I liked. I kind of designed this one based off a picture I found. I'll put the picture in the link in the description if I can find it again. But I've gone ahead and added a few elements that one didn't have so I can show you more examples of how monochromatic schemes work together, how complementary schemes work together, and then just generally why this build works. I want to break it down for you based off its color and its texture and that alone. So we'll start here at the front, right? We have brown and we have grays. Obviously, they worked well together. Most people generally agree with that, I think, in the Minecraft world, that stone and wood looks nice together. But the question I have is, why does it look nice together? Obviously, different colors, right? On the color wheel, they're not next to each other. There is, in fact, no gray on the color wheel. Why does this work together? Well, we can start by saying and assuming that this brown, which is mainly spruce, is underlined with orange. Orange is its underlying hue. Now we know that the value of orange, it can either be darker or lighter, right? And let's say it's not perfectly orange, but you guys get the general gist of this. The darker it gets, let's say, this has more black values in it than that does, right? That's spruce, that's dark oak. Obviously, they're both brown, but one of them's darker because it has more black values in it than the other one does. That's the simple part. But why does this brown here work nicely and pair well with this gray? Well, for one, gray, black, and white, it's the absence of color. So grays work with pretty much anything in this game because they lack color, while let's say the green here of the leaves bounces nicely off of it, because even though they're not complementary, analogous, there's a billion types of color combinations and schemes we can talk about, but even though they're not the ones we went over, the green works nicely against the gray because gray lacks color and green has loads of it. Now the brown works nicely against the gray because, once again, the same concept. Brown has a hue to it and gray doesn't. As a whole, these colors work well together because one of them lacks color while one of them contains color. And you'll find that this works with pretty much every type of design in this game. Even though these are both heavily textured designs like the grass block and the gravel, one lacks color, one has lots of it. And we're going to come inside the house to show you one more thing. So we have dark, right? The absence of color. So this will work with pretty much anything, which is why it works so nicely against the walls. And then we have the blue here, which bounces really nicely off this red, and the brown, because again, orange and blue complement each other. Therefore, we can use them together because they're opposites. And then red, which is, similar to orange on the warmer tones, right? If they're an analogous profile here, orange and red, they work together. And then blue works with red, blue works with orange to some extent, because once again, it follows the general principles we talked about. Now, lots of this room, and I guess I have my FOV way too low. Lots of this room, you know, works well together, I think, because we have some nice orange lighting, which makes the room feel warm. But then the blue kind of bounces some contrast because these are different colors, even though they're in juxtaposition to each other in the same room, same environment, right? We're seeing this as a whole. But really, understanding how color works just helps you decide whether or not an idea is good. Should I make this orange? I could, but orange might be too close to brown, and then it looks kind of muddy, and, you know, there's no contrast, there's no detail to really perceive as separate entities. The bed doesn't blend into the ground because there's this brown here. Brown doesn't blend into that because there's blue around it, and vice versa. And there's loads of different things I can talk about why certain designs work and certain designs don't. But at the end of the day, knowing a few different types of color schemes, how colors work together and how they don't, can really make the difference between a good build and a bad build. I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to leave because, of course, guys, I can make this video about 3 hours long and talk about color. And as this is the first video in the series, it might be a little messy. It might be a little chunky to follow, and I hope it's not. But, you know, there's a fair shot it's not the best explanation in the world. I hope, and I'm going to keep working on making these better. But for now, guys, thanks so much for being here. I'm the T-Palm. If you guys enjoyed the video, please subscribe down below. Leave a comment. I'd love to hear from you guys and hear what you want to see next. Otherwise, stay tuned for the Let's Play, for the live streams, and everything else in between. Till then, I will see you guys soon. Good night.